When I gave birth to my twin daughters, my cruel husband and mother-in-law erupted in anger. They never gave us good news. My husband screamed while hitting me and then threw the divorce papers in my face before leaving me alone. I cried begging for help. But they both abandoned me with my newborns. Desperate, I called my older brother, and before they could return home, they were in for a shocking surprise. Hi, I'm Laura. My story isn't something I ever imagined I'd share, but maybe someone out there can learn from it or find strength in it. I was 29 years old and living in a suburban city. I was married to Ryan, my college sweetheart. Our love story seemed perfect, almost like a fairy tale. We met during our final year in college, bonding over shared dreams, and in no time, we were inseparable. After graduation, we decided to take the next step and got married. The first few years of our marriage were beautiful. Ryan worked as a businessman, managing his import and export companies, while I took care of our home. I loved our life together, and I was genuinely happy. Ryan seemed to adore me, always promising me a bright future. His mother, Margaret, was a regular presence in our lives. She was a strong, determined woman in her 50s. She was often stubborn, but generally kind. Or so I thought. Things took a significant turn when I found out I was pregnant. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. I couldn't wait to share the news with Ryan and Margaret. I still vividly remember that night. Ryan had just returned from work, looking exhausted but in good spirits. Margaret had come for dinner, as she often did. With my heart pounding with excitement, I decided to share the news during dessert. I have wonderful news, I said, struggling to contain my smile. We're going to have a baby. Ryan's face lit up instantly, and Margaret clasped her hands together with what I thought was genuine joy. Oh, Laura, that's amazing, Ryan exclaimed. Margaret nodded, adding with approval, this is wonderful news for the family. You have made us very proud. At that moment, I felt like everything was perfect. Little did I know that this happiness would be fleeting. During my pregnancy, things seemed normal on the surface. Ryan attended medical appointments with me, and Margaret occasionally stopped by with homemade meals. I thought we were becoming closer as a family. However, there were small, seemingly insignificant moments where Margaret would comment about wanting a grandson. You know, Ryan is my firstborn, she would say with a wistful smile. Having a grandson would be a dream come true. Children carry on the family name, after all, Margaret would say, and Ryan would nod in agreement. I'd laugh nervously, brushing it off. We'll be happy no matter what the baby is, I'd reply. But deep down, I started to notice a pattern in their behavior. Ryan and Margaret were becoming increasingly obsessed with the idea of having a boy. As my due date approached, my excitement was mixed with anxiety. I couldn't understand why I felt uneasy. Maybe a part of me sensed that something wasn't right. The day of my delivery finally arrived. Sooner than expected. I went into labor late at night, and Ryan took me to the hospital. Margaret insisted on coming along, and I didn't mind. I thought her presence was a sign of support. Little did I know, it was anything but. The labor was long and exhausting, but when it was over, the doctor announced with a smile, "Congratulations, Laura. You have given birth to twin girls." I was overjoyed at having 2 twin daughters. I couldn't wait to hold them and show them to Ryan. However, when Ryan and Margaret came to see me, their faces were not filled with the joy I had anticipated. Instead, they were pale, as if the doctor had given them terrible news. 2 girls, Ryan murmured softly, with an expression I couldn't decipher. Margaret, standing behind him, looked equally stunned. She whispered something to Ryan, and they both left the room without saying much. At that moment, I was too overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotion to question their behavior. It wasn't until I was moved to a private room that the weight of their reaction hit me. Ryan came in, his face dark with anger. Before I could speak, he burst out, "You have never brought me good news, Laura," he yelled, his voice echoing in the room. "2 girls. This is your fault." His words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about, Ryan? They are our beautiful, healthy daughters. How can that be bad news?" But he wasn't listening. He threw a stack of papers onto the bed. "This is your punishment. Laura, I am divorcing you. I want nothing to do with you or your daughters. I was stunned into silence. My hands were shaking as I picked up the papers. It was a divorce notice. Hastily signed. Before I could process what was happening, Margaret came in, her face cold and devoid of sympathy. This was my idea. Laura, she said coldly. You failed this family. We don't need you anymore. They both left, leaving me alone in a sterile hospital room. I sat there, holding the divorce papers in one hand and clutching the thin hospital blanket with the other, unable to stop the tears from falling. My heart felt shattered into a million pieces. They had abandoned me at the most vulnerable time of my life. I sat in that hospital room for what seemed like hours, holding my daughters in my arms. They were so small, so innocent. And yet they had been rejected by their own father and grandmother. The betrayal burned deep. But my tears quickly dried up. I realized that I had to do something. Not just for myself, but for my daughters. I couldn't let them grow up in a world where they felt unwanted. That night, while rocking my daughters to sleep, I met Dr. Olivia. She wasn't just my attending physician. She also became an unexpected source of comfort. She walked into the room quietly, her face softening with concern. Laura, she said, sitting beside me on the bed. I heard what happened. Are you okay? I shook my head, unable to find the words. Her eyes were filled with genuine empathy. Listen. I know this isn't what you imagined for yourself, but you are not alone. There are people who care about you. If you need help, please let me know. Her kindness brought a flicker of hope to my heart. Thank you, Dr. Olivia. I whispered. I don't know what I'll do yet, but I need to sort this out for them. I looked at my daughters, who were now fast asleep. The next step I took was to call my older brother, David. He lived out of town and was a successful businessman. David had always been my protector, even when we were kids. When I told him everything about how Ryan and Margaret had abandoned me and the twins, his reaction was immediate and fierce. Laura, don't worry, he said over the phone, with a firm and soothing voice. You are not alone in this. I will be there for you every step of the way. Let me handle this. His words were like a balm to my shattered heart. A few days later, I was discharged from the hospital and went to live with David. He welcomed us into his home with open arms and ensured I had everything I needed for the twins. For the first time since that horrible day, I felt a sense of safety. But safety wasn't enough, I needed justice. David and I sat down one evening after the twins had fallen asleep. Laura. David began to speak, his tone serious. We need to expose them for who they really are. Ryan and Margaret think they can get away with this without any consequences. But they're wrong. What can we do? I asked. Let's start by uncovering their secrets. David replied. People like Ryan and Margaret don't live clean lives. They must have something to hide. David hired a private investigator, a man named Mr. Carter, known for his thorough and discreet work. Give him a week, David assured me. He will dig up everything we need. While we waited for the investigation to unfold, I tried to adjust to my new reality. Taking care of the twins was exhausting. But every smile and every tiny movement reminded me why I was fighting so hard. Dr. Olivia checked in on me regularly, offering advice and encouragement. I also found comfort in talking to David, who was my rock. Exactly 1 week later, Mr. Carter called with the news that he had found something. He said that Ryan and Margaret were involved in an illegal import and export operation. It's a pretty extensive network, Carter said. Smuggling prohibited goods, tax evasion, and using shell companies to cover their tracks. The revelation shocked me. I had always known Ryan's business was successful, but I never imagined it was based on illegal activities. Margaret's involvement wasn't surprising. Her controlling nature made it clear that she would do anything to maintain power. David and I decided to take immediate action. We hired a lawyer to build a strong case against them. At first, I hesitated. After all, this was my children's father. But David's words convinced me. Laura, they betrayed you in the worst way, he said firmly. This isn't just about revenge, it's about ensuring they don't hurt anyone else. With the lawyer's help, we gathered all the evidence Mr. Carter had uncovered. Simultaneously, I turned to social media to expose their true nature. I was careful with my posts, sharing just enough for people to know what had happened without jeopardizing our legal case. The response was overwhelming. People reached out with messages of support and outrage. Many couldn't believe the cruelty I had endured, while others shared their own stories of betrayal and resilience. It was empowering to know I wasn't alone. As the case began to take shape, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my daughters, to show them that their mother was strong and capable of standing up to injustice. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and determination. With David by my side and the lawyer guiding us, we began to reconstruct a case so airtight that Ryan and Margaret would have no chance of escaping justice. But even with all the evidence, I knew facing them in court wouldn't be easy. Still, I reminded myself why I was doing this. For my daughters. And for every injustice I had suffered. Our private investigator, Mr. Carter, had uncovered everything we needed. The details of Ryan and Margaret's illegal import and export business were more shocking than I could have imagined. They had been smuggling prohibited products into the country, using fake companies to launder money and evade taxes for years. Margaret was not just an accomplice, she was the mastermind behind most of the operations. It was now clear how they had managed to build their wealth. Armed with all this information, our lawyer, Miss Bennett, began to prepare the legal documents. Laura, she said during one of our meetings, the evidence we have is strong, but their lawyers will not sit idly by. Prepare for a difficult battle, she warned. I'm ready, I replied firmly. I no longer had the luxury of feeling afraid or doubtful. At the same time, I continued to use social media to expose the truth. My posts were carefully crafted. I shared my story and alluded to the evidence without compromising the case. I described how Ryan and Margaret had abandoned my daughters and me, highlighting their preference for a male heir and their cruel betrayal. I never mentioned the illegal activities directly, but the public outcry against their behavior was overwhelming. Comments poured in. Strangers offered their support. Women shared their own stories of betrayal, and some even volunteered to help in any way they could. The more people learned, the more they stood with me, and I felt that I was no longer just fighting for myself. I was fighting for all the women who had faced similar injustices. Then came the day I filed the case in court. It was a surreal moment to see how the evidence we had gathered became official proof. A document that would bring Ryan and Margaret to justice. The charges included financial fraud, tax evasion, smuggling, and abandonment. But filing the case was just the first step. Ryan and Margaret's lawyers responded immediately with counterclaims, accusing me of defamation and trying to damage their reputation out of spite. I wasn't surprised. That was exactly the tactic I expected from them. Their arrogance was their undoing. They believed they were untouchable. The court date was set. But in the meantime, I faced another challenge. Margaret, in a last attempt to regain control, tried to manipulate the narrative. She approached family and mutual friends, telling lies about me. To her, I was an ungrateful wife who had always tried to ruin her family. Some people believed it, but others, knowing her manipulative nature, supported me. David was my anchor during this entire time. One night, he told me, "Don't let it affect you. The truth will come out. And when it does, they won't be able to hide anymore." Meanwhile, the media began to pick up the story. They learned of my posts on social media and the upcoming trial. And coverage only increased public interest. The more attention the case received, the more pressure there was on Ryan and Margaret. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The hearing began, and I walked into the courtroom with David and Miss Bennett by my side. I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. Ryan and Margaret were already there, their faces cold and impassive. I couldn't tell if they were confident or just pretending, but the case was ready to confront them. The trial was tense. Miss Bennett meticulously presented the evidence, showing the court every detail of Ryan and Margaret's illegal activities, bank statements, fake company records, shipping documents. Everything was exposed. Witnesses testified, including employees who had worked for their companies and who, unknowingly, had been part of their schemes. I also took the stand to recount my experience of being abandoned in the hospital and the emotional toll it had taken on me and my daughters. My voice trembled at times, but I didn't hold back. I wanted the court to see the truth. Not just about their crimes, but also about their cruelty. Ryan and Margaret's lawyers tried to discredit me, suggesting that I was seeking revenge out of bitterness. But their arguments couldn't withstand the mountain of evidence we had. At the end of the process, it became clear that Ryan and Margaret had no defense. The judge's ruling came quickly. Ryan and Margaret were found guilty of multiple charges, including financial crimes and abandonment. Their assets, including their house, were confiscated by the court. To my surprise, the court awarded me the house as compensation for the suffering they had caused me. It felt like poetic justice. The same home they had tried to build on lies was now a sanctuary for my daughters and me. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Justice had been served. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. But I knew this wasn't just a victory for me. It was a message to everyone who had ever been wronged, showing them that it's possible to fight and win. The moment I walked out of that courtroom, a torrent of emotions washed over me: relief, pride, and a renewed sense of purpose. I felt all of that while holding my daughters tightly in my arms. Justice had been served, and the people who had betrayed me were finally held accountable for their actions. But this wasn't just about the victory in the courtroom, it was about reclaiming my life and building a future for my daughters. The news of the trial's outcome spread quickly, amplified by media attention and my posts on social media. People who had followed my journey applauded my victory. Strangers sent me messages thanking me for standing up for myself and sharing my story. Some told me they found the courage to leave toxic relationships thanks to what I had done. It was overwhelming to realize the domino effect of my actions, and I felt deeply grateful for the support. As for Ryan and Margaret, their downfall was swift and merciless. The court's decision left them without the wealth and power they had carefully built through their illegal activities. Ryan's business, his empire, collapsed, and Margaret's reputation, which she had once carefully maintained, was in ruins. They both faced jail time for their crimes, ensuring they could not harm anyone else. The same people who were once by their side now distanced themselves, disgusted by the truth that had come to light. The house that the court awarded me became a new chapter for my daughters and me. Entering it for the first time as its rightful owner was a surreal experience. This was the same house where I had once dreamed of building a happy family with Ryan. Now, it was a symbol of my resilience. A place where I could raise my daughters in peace and security. David stayed by my side during the entire transition. His unwavering support was the foundation of my strength. And I will never forget the role he played in helping me fight. "You did it, Laura," he said one night, while unpacking boxes in my new home. "You showed the world how strong you are." But even with justice done, I knew that my journey was not over. Healing from betrayal and rebuilding my life would take time. I started therapy to work through the emotional scars that Ryan and Margaret had left behind. My therapist helped me process the pain, learn to let go of the anger, and focus on the love I had for my daughters. I also found support in a community of women who had faced similar challenges. Together, we shared our stories and encouraged each other to move forward. It was through those connections that I realized how important it was to use my experience to help others. That's when I decided to dedicate part of my time to advocating for women's rights. I began to write more about my journey, to share the lessons I had learned, and to offer advice to others who might be trapped in toxic relationships. My presence on social media grew, and I was soon invited to speak at events and support groups. Each time I shared my story, I felt a little stronger, a little freer. My daughters are now thriving and full of life. They became my greatest joy. Watching them grow reminded me why I had fought so hard. I wanted them to know that their mother stood up for what was right, that I didn't back down even when the odds were stacked against me. They deserved a life free from fear, and I was determined to give it to them. One night, while sitting in the living room of our new home, watching my daughter play, I reflected on how far I had come. The pain of the past no longer held me back. It disappeared completely, but it no longer controlled me. It had become part of my story, a reminder of my strength and resilience. Dr. Olivia, who had been there for me from the beginning, visited me one day and smiled as she looked around the house. Her eyes lit up as she saw my daughters. "Laura," she said, "we've built something beautiful here. I always knew you had it in you." Her words stayed with me. I had been broken, betrayed, and abandoned. But I had risen above it all. My story wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life and turning my pain into power. And now I was ready for whatever the future held, knowing that I had the strength to face it all. This is my story. A journey of betrayal, resilience, and justice. It wasn't easy, but I learned that even in the darkest moments, there is light, and you fight for it. My daughters and I have found our light, and I hope my story inspires others to find theirs as well.